They were the 15th Legion of the Imperium of Man, a brotherhood unlike any other. Known as the Thousand Sons, they were scholars, warriors, and sorcerers, psychers whose mastery of the warp made them both feared and revered across the stars. Their Primarch, Magnus the Red, towered above them, both in intellect and power. Crimson-skinned, crowned with horns like the echo of an ancient god, and gifted with eyes that burned within a light. Magnus was a being who could bend reality itself to his will. And under his guidance, the Thousand Sons became a legion without equal, shaping the fates of worlds with thought and fire before a single bolter was raised. Yet brilliance carries its own poison. Hubris flowed through them like molten gold, beautiful, intoxicating, and ruinous. Their talents were extraordinary, and their blindness to the dangers they courted would one day damn them all. When the Primarchs were scattered by the hand of fate, by luck or by something far older and far wiser, Magnus came to rest upon the shimmering world of Prospero. It was a planet of scholars and mystics, where knowledge was revered as divinity itself. Its cities glimmered beneath golden suns, its people pursued wisdom over conquest, and its libraries reached higher than any temple could. Among these philosopher kings, the young Primarch found his kinship. They recognized in him a prodigy, a mind vast enough to comprehend the warp and all of its intricacies. He learned swiftly, consuming the lore of Prospero as though his very existence depended on it. He mastered every discipline, the arts of telepathy, telekinesis, prophecy, and shaping of matter itself. His teachers became his students, his rivals acolytes, and as he grew in power, so too did his understanding of the warp, that strange mirror realm of thought and madness that underpinned all reality. Among his people, Magnus became not merely a ruler, but the living embodiment of knowledge. They saw in him the promise of transcendence, a being who could lead humanity to godhood through enlightenment. But even then, the seeds of tragedy were sown, for Magnus's hunger for knowledge was boundless. No mystery could remain unchallenged, no limit could stand unbroken. When the Emperor of Mankind at last found Prospero, he discovered not a lost child, but an equal in spirit, a son already ascended beyond mortal comprehension. Magnus greeted him, not as a supplicant, but as one scholar to another, and in that meeting, two of the greatest minds in human history stood face to face. One, the architect of the Imperium, the other, master of the unseen. The Emperor offered command of the 15th Legion, warriors forged from Magnus's own genetic essence. They were designed to complement his gift, each a vessel of psychic potential, minds trained to wield the warp as a weapon, shield, and scripture. Under Magnus, the Legion thrived. They became the librarians of the Great Crusade, archivists of lost knowledge, restorers of forgotten cultures, and warriors who believed that enlightenment was the purest victory. Yet even in triumph, mistrust festered. To many of their brother legions, the Thousand Sons were uncanny. Their rituals were strange, their blazing eyes, their whispered chants before battle. The line between discipline and heresy is thin, and in those early days, Magnus already walked its edge. Across the galaxy, the Thousand Sons brought light where ignorance had taken root. They restored shattered archives, deciphered tongues of extinct empires, and spoke with spirits of data entombed in ancient machines. Where others conquered, they enlightened. Their warriors fought with elegance, minds linked through psychic unity, bolters guided by the arcane, enemies crushed by invisible force. To witness them in battle was to see the impossible rendered real. Golden storms of flame that bent in perfect formation, foes unraveled by gestures alone. And yet, there was something unsettling about their perfection. For every world they saved, whispers followed, that they trafficked with powers beyond understanding, that their miracles were unnatural. Other legions began to turn away from them, muttering of witchcraft and damnation. Magnus dismissed the rumours. Knowledge, he believed, was purity. To fear the warp was to remain a slave to ignorance. But ignorance, as the Emperor well knew, could be a shield. In time, the tension became impossible to ignore. Fear of the psychic spread through the Imperium like wildfire. Worlds that once welcomed the Thousand Suns now barred their gates. Even Magnus's brothers whispered against him. And so the Emperor convened the Council of Nicaea, a grand convocation where primarchs, generals, and scholars would debate the morality of sorcery itself. Before that assembly, Magnus stood radiant and defiant. He spoke of knowledge as salvation, of the warp as a tool to be mastered rather than feared. He promised that through discipline, humanity could rise above its weakness and command the storms of the immaterium. But others spoke in opposition. Leman Russ, the Wolf King of Fenris, growled that sorcery was corruption made manifest. Rogel Dorn and Perturabo warned that it was unpredictable, uncontrollable, and Malkador the Sigillite, ever the Emperor's shadow, said little, but his silence carried the weight of truth. In the end, the Emperor's verdict was final. Psychic powers would be regulated, its practice restricted. All sorcerous rites and arcane arts were to be outlawed. Magnus listened in silence as the decree struck at the core of his being. The Emperor had not merely forbidden his art, he had condemned his very nature. And so the Thousand Suns left Nicaea broken. Magnus's faith in his father wavered, but his conviction in his path did not. Despite the Emperor's command, Magnus could not abandon the pursuit of knowledge. In secret, he and his sons continued their studies, delving deeper into the warp than any mortal mind should. It was here that Magnus's path diverged forever from that of his brothers. For every mystery he unraveled, another emerged, and within that endless recursion of truth, something began to whisper. A presence, vast and ancient, patient and cunning, a god of change who watched from beyond the veil. Magnus believed he could harness it, outthink it, even use its essence for good. Such is the arrogance of genius. Among the other Primarchs, none despised him more than Leman Russ. To the Wolf King, sorcery was cowardice, a betrayal of honor. Their rivalry shimmered, quiet but lethal, until the galaxy itself trembled on the edge of ruin. When the War Master Horus fell to corruption, Magnus was among the first to sense it. In a vision of fire and ruin, he saw the coming war, brother against brother, the Imperium tearing itself apart, and the Emperor brought low upon his throne. Magnus's heart burned with desperation. He sought only to save his father, to prevent the catastrophe before it began. Yet his pride would not allow caution. He believed that only he could reach the Emperor, that his power was vast enough to bridge the chasm between worlds and deliver the warning directly. And so he reached out, not with a ship or with a message, but with his mind. Magnus's psychic projection tore across the warp like a comet of pure thought. He breached the defenses of Terra itself, bypassing wards and sanctums older than empires. In the Emperor's sanctum he appeared, his voice echoing through the immaterium with a single plea. "Father, beware Horus." But in that instant, the cost became clear. The psychic wards he had shattered were not mere barriers. They protected the Emperor's greatest secret, the Webway Project, humanity's bridge to a future free from the warp. Magnus's intrusion had ruptured it, tearing open a wound that could never truly heal. Demons flooded the breach. Centuries of work were undone in a heartbeat. Magnus had meant to save his father, but instead, he had doomed him. And in his attempt to preserve the Imperium, he had become its betrayer. The Emperor's fury was beyond words. To him, Magnus's act was not a warning, but treachery. The son he had trusted to master knowledge had unleashed a catastrophe that could unravel the Imperium itself. He ordered Leman Russ and his wolves to bring Magnus to Terra in chains that he might answer for his crime. But in the shadows, Horus, already fallen, twisted the order. What was meant as arrest became execution. Russ was told that Magnus had turned wholly to chaos, that Prospero must be burned, its people cleansed, and so the wolves were unleashed. Prospero, jewel of light and learning, had never known war like this. When the sky tore open with the howls of drop pods and flame, its people looked up not with hatred, but disbelief. The wolves of Fenris had come, a legion bred for slaughter. What followed was apocalypse. The city of Tisca, its spires of glass and gold that reached into eternity, was torn apart by bombardment. The streets ran red with the blood of scholars and soldiers alike. Libraries that had stood tall for millennia burned in minutes, their knowledge turned to ash. 1,000 suns resisted as only they could, with thought and fire. Psychic energy crackled across the sky, arcs of lightning flaring from outstretched hands. Bolts of warp flame consumed entire companies of the wolves, but for every one that fell, 10 more came. Brother fought brother, genekin against genekin. The air itself screamed with power, and in the midst of the ruin, Magnus watched his sons die, his heart aching with the weight of all he had lost. His father's trust, his brother's love, and now his world. When at last Leman Russ confronted Magnus, the planet itself seemed to hold its breath. The Wolf King advanced through fire and ruin, his axe dripping with the blood of Magnus's sons. The Crimson King stood tall before him, vast and radiant, his single eye burning like a dying star. No words passed between them, only understanding. Steel met sorcery. The ground split beneath them as their power collided. The warp screamed, reality shuddered. Magnus, mighty though he was, faltered, his body broken and his spirit torn between despair and fury. And in that final moment, faced with annihilation, he chose escape. With a spell of immeasurable power, Magnus tore open the veil of reality and carried what remained of his legion into the warp itself. Prospero was left behind, a dead world, its ashes whispering the names of the fallen. Within the warp, the 1,000 suns found themselves upon a shifting, impossible world, a realm of ever-changing towers, seas of glass, and skies that burned with living colour. This was the planet of sorcerers, their new home, granted to them by the being who had watched Magnus for so long, Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways. Magnus, broken in body and spirit, accepted his fate. He bent the knee to the god of change, not out of worship, but out of despair, believing that through such allegiance he might yet preserve his sons. But the warp is no sanctuary. The mutations that had long plagued the Legion, once held at bay by Magnus's power, now flourished unchecked. Flesh twisted into impossible forms, minds dissolved into madness. Those who were once scholars and warriors became beasts and horrors of the Immaterium. Magnus grieved. He had traded his world to save his sons, and now even they were slipping from his grasp. Among the Legion, one mind refused to surrender to despair. Ahriman, chief librarian, and once Magnus's most devoted student, gathered a cabal of sorcerers who still retained clarity. He believed that through one final act of magic, they could save their brothers, to halt the mutations that devoured their souls. They worked in secret, weaving a spell of staggering complexity. Their intent was salvation, their ambition was absolute. The ritual burned through the warp like a supernova. For a heartbeat, it seemed to work. The mutations ceased, the howls of agony stilled, but then came silence. The 1,000 suns were too still. Their flesh had been turned to dust, their bodies sealed forever within their armor, their souls burned on, imprisoned in eternal awareness. The rubric of Ahriman was complete. Ahriman had achieved the impossible. He saved the Legion, but at a cost too great to bear. The Thousand Sons were no longer men, but living relics, their armor walking tombs, and their consciousness trapped within grains of dust. Magnus's fury was immeasurable. He cast Ahriman and his followers out into the void, banishing them to wander eternity. Yet even in his rage, he could not deny the truth. His sons were now beyond suffering and beyond redemption. Magnus retreated to his tower upon the planet of sorcerers, withdrawing from his legion and from reality itself. He pondered the nature of fate, of knowledge, of the Emperor, and of the great game of gods and men. His soul burned with guilt and pride in equal measure. He had sought knowledge to save humanity, yet in doing so, he delivered it to damnation. He had loved his father and defied him. He had sought to master the warp and became its servant instead. And so Magnus ascended, no longer merely Primarch, but Demon Primarch of Tzeentch, master of sorcery, lord of the impossible. In his new form, vast and radiant, he saw all his triumphs and failures as threads in an endless tapestry of change. The god of change whispered to him that nothing is ever truly lost, that even in ruin, you will find it has its place in the grand design. Magnus listened and wept. The gods of chaos are fickle, and the changer of ways delights in endless irony. And so the Thousand Sons continue their pilgrimage through eternity, seekers of knowledge, prisoners of their own enlightenment, guided by a master who once sought to save mankind and instead became its eternal warning. They remain forever bound to the cycle of discovery and damnation. The Crimson King's Court, unending, unbroken, and unforgotten.